In general, children just ask a lot of questions, right? Moms, dads, kids just ask a lot of questions. Now I'm going to ask what is the number one question, not a specific question, but what general kind of question is the number one kind of question a kid asks? Why? You knew it right away. Why is always the most. And they're good. They're good questions. They're inquisitive questions, and they deserve answers. And it's important, that we answer it because it just shows that they're trying to learn and want to know these things. But at some point, I don't care what your answer is, it's going to be followed by why. It's just going to keep coming. The why keeps coming. And no matter how good you are in answering those questions, at some point you reach that stage that you're just not ready to give the answer. I remember this. This was a little over 33 years ago. I was standing right here, right there, like the first week I was here. And I walked up to one of the little kids that was here, and he looked up at me and he said, "Why are your teeth yellow?" And I looked at him, I said, "From working with kids like you too many years." And so we got off to a good start right there. We had an understanding between each other, And as adults, I read this week. It says if you ask a lot of why questions as an adult, you're interested in reasons. If you ask a lot of how questions, you're more interested in results and solutions. That may have an idea, a little insight into how you choose your career, whether you're interested in reasons or solutions. But even as adults, we reach that point where we probably shouldn't ask why so many times. I read this week about a man was at the gas station. He's pumping gas. It was a cold, windy day, and he's pumping gas. And a woman pulls up, a woman gets out of the car, and she just got on a T-shirt and no jacket, and she's pumping gas over there. And he looks, and there's a man sitting in the driver's seat. And he just, he walks over to the lady. He says, "I just got to ask, how come he isn't pumping? Why isn't he pumping the gas?" And she goes, "That's my mother." So, sometimes you don't need to ask. Just stay in your lane, Just stay in your lane. We can ask too many why questions. Easter is only 28 days away, four Sundays away. Easter, I think, deserves a lot of why questions. Why some things happened the way they did. Why did it turn out this, and why a lot of that? And Jesus had a tremendous amount of things going on in his life in those final hours, final days, that I think deserve asking of why this had to happen. And so that's what we're going to do through the month leading up to Easter, is just ask some why questions. Why Easter? And the first one we're going to ask is this, is why did Jesus' friends desert him? Why did Jesus' friends desert him? And I feel like you're a lot like me, that when you read this, that after spending 3 years with Jesus and seeing everything that he's done and what you've witnessed, that to desert him and walk away is just almost mind-boggling to us. But I hope that we're going to see as we study in Matthew 26, and that's where we're going to be today, and looking in Matthew 26, it's not to help us understand what the disciples did, but it's going to help us understand some things about ourselves, to see if we have some of those things living deep inside of us that could cause us to desert our friends or to desert Jesus. So we're going to look at these things. It's three stories within one as we look at this today. And the first one we'll call this the disciple story. And we're in Matthew 26, and we'll start with verse 36, says this. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And if we read on, we find out that this was repeated 2 more times, a total of 3 times he comes back to speak to them. Now, if you're taking any notes, a good word to write down here is the first reason for the disciples deserting Jesus. A good thought maybe is fatigue. Fatigue. They were tired. Have you ever fallen asleep at an inopportune time? I've made a whole career by falling asleep in places you're not supposed to sleep. I tell people I've slept on every job I ever had and in every class I ever took. And that is the truth. I've watched, but don't get too judgmental. I've watched some of you go to sleep too. You know, when you see somebody start to get that nodding off look and stuff, it's kind of like a car wreck. You don't want to look, but you can't look away. You know, I just got to keep looking and see the progress, how deep a sleep you're actually going to get into. But long, stressful days that led up to this night in the Garden of Gethsemane. In a recent survey, it said that 80% of Americans describe their work as stressful. Stress, fatigue, stress are 2 very powerful realities of the life that we live. And it could have been a major reason for how they reacted the way they did. Go back to Matthew 26, verse 55 says this. At that time, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Now, whether fatigue is a part of it or not, or whether they should deserted him, but if you can imagine and put yourself there, to be tired, to be with Jesus, and to be going through all that was taking place, to fall asleep praying, and then to be awakened by soldiers, the clamor of soldiers and a mob and a crowd and the swords and the torches in the middle of the night. If there be a time to be scared, to flee, we can understand that. You see, fatigue and stress are just doorways into fear. Our fear shows up when we're like that. One sets a trap, fear ruled the moment, and desertion was the result. Jesus described his disciples this way when he was speaking to them, trying to warn them. Start saying it with me as soon as you pick up where I'm going here. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Boy, is that so true. That we have the will. We want to do right. We want to be a good example. We want to do these things, but we find that weakness overshadows it many times. This was not only a description, but it was a warning. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And he was trying to get them to listen so they could be prepared for what was just around the corner. Now, that's the disciples' story. Do you see any of yourself in that story? That how fatigue and stress can lead to fear and then maybe deserting at the worst time. Let's look at another story, and this one's Simon Peter's story. When Jesus warned the disciples, he says, all of you will desert me. Simon Peter said this in Matthew 26:33. He says, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. I think if we're going to write down one word to characterize Simon Peter's problem here, it was just simple arrogance. His arrogance. As I read that there, I don't know if you picked up, there was a lot of the word I in that. That had I. You see, eye trouble blinds us in more way than one. Peter's statement, although once again, he meant well, saying, I'll never let you down, Lord. I'll never be. It has an air of superiority. And even though it says that the disciples said the same thing, it's Peter's way of saying it was, these other guys I know, you're having trouble maybe counting on, but you can count on me. I will not let you down. And as important as it is for us to be resolute to our commitments and our convictions, we must guard against pride and arrogance. And this is the big reason, because pride and arrogance causes us to make too many mistakes. Causes us to make too many mistakes. And when that happens, we let people down. We let God down. See, Jesus was trying to prepare them. He wasn't just trying to predict something. He was trying to prepare them for what was coming. And then he ignored the warning and a time of preparation. This was a time to prepare for the next moments that were coming. A little bit later in the evening, Jesus was enduring one of the trials that he was going through. And it says that Peter and John had kind of come close, and they'd come into the courtyard and were warming themselves at the fire. And it says that one servant girl said, hey, weren't you with him? Weren't you with Jesus earlier? And Simon Peter says, oh, no, I'm not one of them. I don't know him. It says that another person comes from and says, oh, yeah, you were with him, weren't you? And Simon Peter says, oh, no. And then finally it says as kind of the whole, they said, hey, yeah, you are one of them. Your accent gives you away. Because they knew that he spoke with the same accent of being from Galilee. He said it gives away. And that's when Simon Peter said this in verse 74. He said, then he began to call down curses on himself, and he swore, I don't know the man. Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. So hard for us, as we read this and try to put ourselves back there, it's hard to understand that just an hour or two before, Simon Peter, when they came to arrest Jesus, pulled out the sword, the one sword the crowd had, pulls out the sword and is really ready to fight for Jesus. And it says he swung the sword and cut the part of the ear off of the servant. I don't think he was aiming for the ear. I think he was aiming for the head. And he cut the ear off. And you go, how can a man go from willing to fight and die like that to where he swears that he doesn't even know him? Why such a change? One writer speculated that Simon Peter drew his sword when he was surrounded by his friends. He had his foundation around him. And he had the strength, he drew from the strength. But now, he's warming himself around the fire in the camp of the enemy. Another one speculated that fighting and even dying, willing to die, was easier for Simon Peter to do than to be subjected to the slow, gradual, eventual ridicule that he was going to be facing here. Maybe he'd been spending too much time warming himself by the fire in the camp of the enemy. He had not been listening to the warnings of God. He was so confident in himself that he pushed Jesus' warnings aside. You see, this is a sad truth for us Christians. When we fail for someone else too. When we fail as a Christian father or mother, husband, wife, friend, Sunday school, when we fail, it hurts people. And that's a heavy load to bear, but it's the truth. Pride and arrogance would be the thing that characterized Simon Peter in this. But there's a third story I want us to notice, and that's Judas' story. That's Judas' story. Even the most casual observer of Christianity or reader of the Bible knows the name Judas. a name that is synonymous with betrayer. But yet, it says he was a friend of Jesus. He spent 3 years with Jesus. In the close confines, they ate together at the table. He was chosen by Jesus. He was the treasurer in the group. And you don't trust somebody with the money bag unless you think good about them. And even in this graphic that I got off of the internet for Judas, you notice that it has a sinister look to Judas. But I really don't believe that Judas was sinister in his look, wore a black cape, and laughed evilly. I always thought this was funny. When I came here and I was a youth minister and I'd work in camp every summer, I had a full beard. Some of you know me long enough, you remember I had a full beard. Well, they always had me play Jesus at camp when we do the plays because I had a beard. Well, a day came that I said, I'm going to get rid of the beard and I'm just going to go with the goatee. They started asking me to be Satan in the plays. No joke, no joke. Just a little lack of facial hair, and it changed my whole outcome, in life, who I got to portray. But we have these pictures of people. Judas probably was just like all the others in the group. But why did he desert the one he was so close to? I guess the one word we'd have to write down is greed. It's greed. Earlier in the Jesus ministry, you remember the time when Mary poured perfume on Jesus to anoint him, poured perfume. And it says there in John 12, where the story is told, that Judas got upset. He says, why? This is such a waste of money. We could have sold this perfume and helped so many poor people with it. But John, with having the opportunity now to look back, when he's writing his story, he said, Judas didn't care about the poor, for he was stealing from the treasury. Judas wanted more money to go into the bank bag, so there'd be more for him to steal. Judas was trying to serve two masters. And Judas, along with everyone else, had heard Jesus teach and preach about that the destructive power of money and greed. He'd heard Jesus say, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? But he betrayed Jesus for money. For money. And it wasn't a tremendous amount of money either. What a terrible choice. But we see those choices made every day. That people choose career over Christ. That they choose to work over volunteering. To choose the things that will give them something in this life, to give them get ahead in this life over serving God. And we make the same terrible choices. Here's another word, the greed, and then when that didn't come through for him, it led to him being disillusioned. If something causes us to be disillusioned, think about it. Something always causes us to be, there's a reason behind when we become disillusioned. For Judas, it was clear that he thought the money and the power was going to come his way. But when Jesus made it clear that he wasn't interested in an earthly kingdom, he became disillusioned with following Jesus, and he was ready to jump ship. And he said, I'm going to get whatever I can at this time. It makes you worry about all of us or Christians who, if we come into this with the idea that now that I'm a Christian, that nothing bad's going to happen because I am a Christian. And when those things, when your plans and God's plans don't match up, your timing and God's timing doesn't happen at the same time, you can become disillusioned. And Judas's disillusionment led to even worse thing to happen. Matthew 27 verse 3 says this, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priest and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. Disillusionment can easily lead to hopelessness. For Judas, his greed and desire for more took him to a very hopeless and dark place. And it doesn't just have to be for money. It can be we become disillusioned with love, or disillusioned with our position in life, or disillusioned with the absence of love in our life, or what it can be 1,000 things. But disillusionment can lead us to a very hopeless, dark place. For you see, anything that we pursue above pursuing our relationship with God is going to lead to a darker place. But you have to know this. You just have to know this. None of us are hopeless. None of us are out or beyond the reach of Jesus. You see, every one of us are going to get to the place where Simon Peter or Judas got to. That we say, oh, why did I do that? I wish I could turn back the time and I could undo all this. But you know, we can't, can we? Once we've done those things, we can't undo them. So we're going to be in the same place that Judas and Simon Peter and all the other disciples were. And that's what you do at that moment. You know, do you turn back to God? And as hard as it is for us to believe that they turned against Jesus, deserted him, it's harder to believe that Jesus welcomed them all back and took them right back in. Simon Peter, all the other disciples, and he would have Judas as well if Judas would have come back. You may feel like a Simon Peter here today. You may feel as though you've gone as far as a Judas. But there's none of us out of the reach of Jesus. And we have to know that. It has to be at the heart of everything we know, that Jesus is there. Why did Jesus' friends desert him? We see the reasons. Hopefully, we can see our own weaknesses and how it can happen with us as well. And we learn from it.